My name is Isla Murphy, and I am 28 years old. The night of my 18th birthday, I worked a 10-hour shift wiping down sticky vinyl booths at a diner on Colfax Avenue. I walked up my driveway in the dark to find the front door locked and my birthday cake sitting on the concrete porch. My parents had left a yellow sticky note slapped right over the plastic window of the bakery box. They had packed up and driven to a mountain resort to celebrate my older brother because his hockey team made the regional qualifiers. The note told me to have a good night and eat the cake. I did not eat the cake. I stepped over it, packed a duffel bag, and disappeared from their lives for 10 years. But here is the detail that matters. You cannot just vanish. You have to take every piece of paper that proves you exist. I left one old tax form in my desk drawer, and a decade later my father used it to hire an investigator to hunt me down and try to force me to pay for my brother's crimes. Welcome back to Fluffy Revenge, where quiet boundaries outlast loud manipulation. If you have ever been the child expected to survive on crumbs while someone else is handed a feast, tell me how old you were when you finally walked away in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe because the trap my family tried to set for me is one you need to hear to believe. Let me take you back to that concrete porch. The motion sensor light clicked on, casting a yellow glare over the scene. The cake was a cheap grocery store special. The evening heat had already done its work. The plastic window was fogged with condensation, and underneath it the neon pink frosting was sweating. The sugary borders were melting into a puddle, warping the cardboard edges and seeping into the concrete. My brother Connor was 20 years old. He was a mediocre defenseman with a bad temper, but in the Murphy household he was the undisputed center of gravity. Everything orbited Connor. His practices, his games, his moods, his potential. My milestones were just traffic on the way to his destinations. I stood on the porch and stared at the bleeding pink letters spelling out my name. I did not cry. Tears are an investment, and I had learned long ago that spending emotional energy on my parents yielded a 0% return. This moment was not a sudden betrayal. It was an audit. It was a final, clarifying accounting of my worth in this family. Connor required an expensive resort weekend for a regional qualifier. My entry into adulthood warranted a $10 pastry left on the ground like a delivered package. I reached under the ceramic frog near the door, grabbed the spare key, and let myself in. The house was dark, quiet, and thick with the scent of my mother's floral perfume. It lingered in the foyer like an unpaid debt. I did not turn on the lights. I walked up the stairs to my bedroom and pulled a canvas duffel bag from the closet. I packed 3 pairs of jeans, a handful of shirts, and my hiking boots. I reached under my mattress and pulled out a white envelope. It held my diner tips saved dollar by dollar for 2 years. I unpinned the plastic name tag from my grease-stained uniform and dropped it in the trash can. Downstairs in the kitchen, I laid my house key on the granite island. I placed it right next to a towering stack of Connor's unopened mail. I walked back out the front door, stepping past the ruined cake, and headed toward the downtown bus station. The terminal smelled like diesel exhaust and damp pavement. I bought a one-way ticket out of town and found a window seat near the back. The air brakes hissed. The bus pulled out into the night. I leaned my head against the cold glass and mentally inventoried what I had packed. Clothes, cash, identification. Then the engine rumbled, vibrating through the thin seat cushion, and a quiet realization settled in my chest. In my calculated rush, I had emptied the cash envelope, but left the folder underneath it. The folder holding my first tax forms and my social security card. I watched the streetlights pass. I told myself it did not matter. I was severing the tie. They would not care enough to look for it. They barely noticed when I was standing right in front of them. I was wrong. That single piece of abandoned paperwork was a loaded weapon left waiting in a desk drawer. I spent the next 10 years building a life of unwavering self-reliance in the Rocky Mountains, becoming a financial advisor who specialized in bulletproof boundaries. I thought I was safe. I had no idea they were holding onto that social security number, waiting for the exact moment my brother needed a human shield. 10 years is a long time to let an empty ledger sit untouched. I am 28 now, living in Denver, Colorado. My reality today is built on granite altitude and irrefutable math. The sharp, satisfying click of a forged steel carabiner locking into place echoed off the limestone wall. I wedged my climbing shoes into a narrow fissure, tightened my core, and pulled my weight up the final pitch of a demanding route in the Rockies. The cold, thin mountain air burned in my lungs. My forearms ached with a familiar, welcome tension. Out here on the rock face, gravity does not negotiate. You either secure your hold, or you fall. The mountain does not care if you are the forgotten daughter or the favored son. It does not grade on a curve for past grievances. Effort equals elevation. That is the fundamental culture of this state, a place defined by physical resilience and a strict, down-to-earth meritocracy. It is the exact philosophy I used to construct a new identity from the ground up. Liam reached his hand over the top ledge and hauled me onto the flat summit. He is a backcountry rescue guide, a man whose entire profession revolves around keeping a cool head when other people are losing theirs. He possesses a steady, unhurried demeanor that only comes from navigating avalanches and guiding stranded hikers off freezing peaks. He does not panic. He does not waste syllables on empty promises. When we met 3 years ago at a bouldering gym downtown, he did not try to unravel my past or fix the quiet parts of my personality. He simply recognized that we moved at the same pace. He handed me a metal water bottle, checked the tension on my safety harness, and smiled. His eyes are always assessing, always ensuring the gear is sound. My chosen family is made of people just like Liam. We do not demand blind allegiance or unconditional favors. We earn our positions in each other's lives through competence and consistency. If a friend says they will bring the safety ropes, the ropes arrive. There are no manufactured crises designed to test your devotion. There are no moving targets, no shifting expectations, and no birthday cakes left sweating on the concrete. We just show up. That same physical and emotional resilience translates seamlessly into my professional life. When the weekend ends, I trade my chalk bag and climbing harness for a tailored blazer and a corner office in a high-end financial district. I am a wealth management advisor at a prestigious boutique firm. My clients are self-made business owners, tech entrepreneurs, and families who have accumulated significant wealth and need someone ruthless to protect it. They do not hire me to hold their hands. They hire me because I look at their lives through a lens of cold, hard data. My ledgers are spotless. My boundaries are heavy and reinforced. In my office, with the panoramic view of the snow-capped peaks behind my desk, I strip the emotion out of money. When a client wants to make a foolish investment to bail out an irresponsible relative, I slide a spreadsheet across the table. I show them the exact trajectory of their financial ruin. I do not deal in guilt. I deal in yields, risk assessment, and fiduciary duty. I construct irrevocable trusts, establish corporate firewalls, and build portfolios designed to withstand any economic storm. My early life provided a masterclass in how toxic environments extract your resources and call it love. I learned that emotional manipulation is just theft wearing a familial mask. Because of that, my professional architecture is designed to spot a bad investment from a mile away and neutralize it before it drains the principal. For a decade, I operated under the assumption that the severed tie was permanent. I changed my phone number the day I arrived in Denver. I deleted my old email accounts. I never searched for my parents online, and I never checked to see if my brother finally learned how to clean up his own messes. I assumed they were content in their bubble, funneling every spare ounce of energy into Connor's endless needs. I believed my absence was exactly what they wanted, a convenient relief from having to pretend they cared. My silence was a compound interest account paying dividends in peace and stability year after year. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and bright. The kind of autumn day where the Colorado sky looks like shattered blue glass. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a complex estate transfer for a client who owned a chain of local outdoor gear shops. My focus was absolute. I was verifying tax codes and tracing asset lines, ensuring the wealth would transfer smoothly to the next generation without triggering unnecessary penalties. The firm was quiet, operating with the low, pleasant hum of serious money being managed by serious people. Then the intercom on my desk buzzed. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that broke my concentration. I pressed the receiver button. I expected it to be my 10 o'clock appointment arriving early. Isla, my receptionist said. Her voice was usually a smooth, professional alto, but today it carried a tight note of confusion. I am sorry to interrupt your review. There is a man in the lobby asking to see you. I told him you operate strictly by appointment and that your morning is fully booked. I kept my eyes on the dual monitors illuminating my desk. Offer him a business card and tell him to schedule a consultation through the main portal. If he refuses, ask security to walk him out. I tried that, she replied, her voice dropping lower, adopting a hushed tone. He refused the card. He says he does not need an appointment because he is your father. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The cursor blinked steadily on the spreadsheet. A cold, heavy sensation pooled in the center of my chest, a phantom echo of a life I had boxed up and buried 10 years ago. My father. Richard Murphy did not belong in this city, let alone in the polished marble lobby of my wealth management firm. He belonged in a different lifetime. I is mistaken, I said, my voice maintaining its flat, clinical tone. I do not have family in Denver. Have security escort him off the premises immediately. Isla, wait. The receptionist sounded genuinely unnerved now. I was going to call security, but he leaned over my desk. He said if you tried to turn him away, I needed to give you a specific number. He said it would prove who he is. I leaned back in my leather chair. What number? She read off a sequence of 9 digits. The air in my office seemed to thin out, mimicking the atmosphere at the top of a peak. I recognized the sequence instantly. It was not a random string of numbers. It was my Social Security number. The exact number printed on the old tax document I had accidentally left in my childhood desk drawer on the night I packed my duffel bag and took the bus out of town. I had kept it. He had held on to that single piece of abandoned paperwork for a decade, waiting in the silence. And now he was standing 30 feet away, armed with the one key that could still turn the lock on my past. I instructed my receptionist to hold my upcoming calls and stood up from my desk. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal blazer. In the financial sector, professional attire functions as a boundary. It is a visual cue establishing authority, long before a single word is spoken. I walked down the glass-paneled corridor toward the reception area. My pulse remained steady. I chose to treat this impending encounter the exact same way I handled a sudden market downturn. I needed to identify the vulnerability, isolate the risk, and neutralize the threat. I stepped into the foyer. The space was intentionally designed to intimidate and reassure clients simultaneously, featuring soaring floor-to-ceiling windows and imported Italian marble. Standing near the sleek reception desk was Richard Murphy. He looked noticeably older. His shoulders stooped under the fabric of a frayed navy suit that had gone out of style a decade ago. The cuffs of his trousers were worn thin, and the collar of his shirt looked limp. He shifted his weight nervously. The cheap rubber soles of his scuffed leather shoes squeaked against the pristine marble floor. That sound, a high-pitched friction of desperation, echoed in the cavernous room. It contrasted sharply with the hushed, expensive atmosphere of my firm. He saw me approach. His eyes widened, and he threw his arms open in a grand theatrical gesture. Isla, he announced. His voice projected across the lobby, clearly designed to draw the attention of the junior associates reviewing files nearby. My little girl, look at you. We have missed you so much. He took an eager step forward, visibly expecting me to collapse into a tearful embrace. He hoped the audience of my peers would compel me to play the role of the prodigal daughter returning to the fold. He was attempting to leverage public courtesy against my private boundaries. I did not move a single inch. I did not soften my expression. I offered him the same polite, impassive gaze I reserve for walk-in clients who lack the minimum portfolio requirements to merit my time. Richard, I said. My voice was a flat, regulated baritone that carried zero warmth. I did not call him Dad. I had resigned from that position 10 years prior. You are disrupting a place of business. If you wish to speak with me, we will do so behind closed doors. I turned on my heel without waiting for his consent and walked toward conference room B. It was our primary negotiation space, soundproofed with acoustic panels, and outfitted with a heavy oak door. I heard the frantic squeaking shuffle of his shoes hurrying to follow my pace. He scurried behind me like a desperate borrower running late for a crucial loan committee meeting. I entered the room, waited for him to cross the threshold, and shut the door behind us. The heavy latch clicked into place, severing us from the polite murmurs of the firm. The silence inside the room was immediate and profound. I gestured toward a leather executive chair on the opposite side of a long mahogany table. "Sit." He lowered himself into the seat, looking suddenly small against the expansive backdrop of the Denver skyline visible through the window behind me. I remained standing, placing my hands flat on the polished wood surface. "My receptionist informed me you recited my social security number to her. That is a federal identifier, not a parlor trick to bypass building security. How did you locate my office?" He dabbed at his forehead with a crumpled tissue he pulled from his pocket. "We had to find you, Isla. Your mother and I have been beside ourselves with worry. We hired a private investigator." He sniffled a calculated sound meant to elicit pity. "It took him months, but he tracked your professional licensing using that old tax document you left behind in your room. I analyzed the data he just provided. My parents had refused to co-sign my student loans. They had balked at paying $40 for my high school track uniform, citing a tight budget while simultaneously funding my brother's hockey camps. Yet they had willingly paid a private investigator thousands of dollars to track a daughter they ignored for her entire childhood. People who operate on a scarcity mindset do not spend capital unless they expect a significant return on their investment. You spent premium rates to locate me after 10 years of silence," I stated. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him, maintaining eye contact. "You did not travel across state lines to admire my corner office. People do not hire investigators to deliver apologies." Richard looked at his hands, playing the role of a defeated, humble man. It was a stark contrast to the arrogant father who used to mock my ambitions over the dinner table. Out here in Colorado, I had learned to read people by their actions in a crisis, not their rehearsed monologues. When a climber claims they are prepared but carries no safety gear, you trust the missing gear, not their words. Richard was carrying no emotional safety gear. He was carrying an agenda. "We just wanted to see you," he pleaded. His voice trembled in a way that felt practiced in a rearview mirror. "Can a father not want to reconnect with his successful daughter? We are so proud of the life you have built here." "You do not know the life I have built here," I countered, keeping my tone steady and unyielding. "You know my professional title and my office address. You bought that information. Do not confuse a purchase dossier with a relationship. State your business. Richard or I will have security escort you to the parking garage." The facade of the heartbroken patriarch began to crack. The false warmth vanished, replaced by the nervous energy of a man out of options. He unbuttoned his frayed suit jacket and reached into the inner pocket. The air in the soundproof room felt heavy. He was not here to offer an olive branch. He was here to collect on a debt I did not owe. "Things have been hard back home, Isla," he muttered, his eyes darting away from my unwavering gaze. "Your brother has been trying his best to keep the family afloat, but the economy has been brutal. We hit a rough patch. A very bad rough patch." "Connor's financial mismanagement is not my concern," I replied. "I do not underwrite his failures." I stared at him without blinking. In my line of work, clients slide papers across the table every day. Bank statements, portfolio summaries, venture capital proposals. I am trained to spot the hidden liabilities in every transaction. The liability sitting in front of me was not just financial. It was generational. Richard wanted me to look at him and feel a surge of familial guilt. He expected the old conditioning to kick in, the ingrained belief that it was my job to absorb the family's pain so my brother could continue to thrive. But the woman sitting across from him was no longer an 18-year-old girl desperate for a crumb of validation. I was a fiduciary. I protected assets for a living, and my most valuable asset was my peace of mind. Richard swallowed hard. His hands shook slightly as he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He did not spend thousands of dollars on a private investigator just to apologize for a ruined birthday cake. He placed the document flat on the mahogany table and used 2 fingers to slide it slowly across the polished wood toward me. I looked down at the paper. It was a formal bank notice printed on heavy stock. The bold black letters across the top spelled out a notice of intent to foreclose. I stared at the heavy stock paper resting on the polished mahogany table. Notice of intent to foreclose. The bold black ink spelled out the impending doom of my childhood home, the same house where I had been systematically ignored for 18 years. I did not touch the document. I merely scanned the figures printed near the bottom margin. The outstanding principal balance was staggering, a number that made no logical sense for a property purchased 3 decades ago. I ran a quick amortization calculation in my head. The original mortgage should have been satisfied long ago. Instead, the debt had multiplied. They had drained every drop of equity from the property, treating their foundation like an endless automated teller machine. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He interlaced his fingers, adopting the posture of a man carrying the weight of the world. He took a shaky breath, a sound designed to elicit sympathy. "It is your mother," he said, his voice dropping to a fragile whisper. "Patricia is sick. She has been declining for a couple of years now. A rare neurological condition. The treatments are experimental, not covered by our insurance network. The out-of-pocket costs have been astronomical. We had to take out a second mortgage, then a third, just to keep her comfortable." He paused, letting the silence stretch across the soundproof conference room. Then he performed the maneuver. He reached up with a trembling hand and wiped away a single, perfectly timed tear from his left cheek. He held his hand there for an extra second, his eyes locked on mine, ensuring I witnessed his fabricated vulnerability. He wanted me to see a devoted husband breaking under the strain of a tragic medical crisis. I saw a calculated presentation. In my profession, you learn to identify the difference between genuine distress and a sales pitch. When a client faces sudden medical insolvency, their financial records reflect chaos, scattered payments, and panicked liquidations. Richard did not look panicked. He looked like a man executing a rehearsed script. He waited for me to offer comfort, to reach across the table and take his hand. I kept my hands folded in my lap. When I did not provide the expected emotional validation, he quickly shifted his tactic to the secondary hook. He brought up the golden child. "Connor has been trying his best." Richard continued, his tone shifting from sorrowful to defensive. "Your brother stepped up. He really tried to carry the burden for us. He took out personal loans to help with the medical debt. He worked double shifts, sacrificing his own future to keep a roof over our heads. But he is drowning Isla. The interest rates are burying him. We are out of options, and the bank is threatening to take the house by the end of the month." He leaned closer, his eyes wide with manufactured desperation. "You are a financial advisor. You handle millions of dollars for strangers. We need your expertise. We need your help to restructure this debt. We need you to step in just until Connor can get back on his feet. Family helps family, Isla. That is what matters in the end." The sheer audacity of the request hung in the air. He was asking the daughter he abandoned to leverage her professional standing and her personal liquidity to bail out the son he worshipped. He was dressing up financial extortion in the language of familial duty. My Colorado instincts kicked in, overriding any residual childhood programming. Out here in the high country, survival depends on situational awareness. If a storm rolls over the ridge, you do not stand in the open and yell at the clouds. You secure your gear, find shelter, and assess the terrain. I did not react with anger. I did not raise my voice or hurl accusations about my ruined 18th birthday. Emotional outbursts are a waste of caloric energy, and they give the opposition insight into your strategy. Instead, I treated him exactly like a hostile corporate entity attempting a leveraged buyout. "I am sorry to hear about Patricia's declining health," I stated, my voice devoid of inflection. However, restructuring a debt of this magnitude requires a comprehensive review of all underlying assets and liabilities. I do not offer financial remedies based on verbal summaries. If you want my professional assessment, I require full transparency. I need digital copies of all mortgage statements, your mother's medical billing records, and a detailed accounting of these personal loans Connor purportedly acquired. Richard blinked, clearly thrown off balance by my clinical response. He had expected tears, righteous indignation, or immediate compliance. He had not anticipated a strict request for documentation. "Of course," he stammered, standing up quickly. "I have everything scanned on a flash drive at my hotel. I can email the files to you tonight. Whatever you need to look at, we will provide. We just need a bridge loan, Isla. Just a temporary influx of capital to stop the foreclosure. Send the raw data," I commanded, standing up to indicate the meeting was over. "I will review your financials strictly as a consultant. I make no promises regarding liquidity or intervention until I verify the numbers." I opened the heavy oak door and waited for him to exit. He tried to initiate a hug on out, opening his arms toward me. I took a deliberate step backward, creating an undeniable physical boundary. He dropped his arms, a flash of genuine annoyance briefly breaking through his sorrowful facade before he turned and scurried out of the lobby. The rest of my workday passed in a blur of standard client calls and portfolio rebalancing. I maintained my focus, compartmentalizing the unscheduled audit until I could address it on my own terms. When evening fell, I drove back to my townhouse in the Highlands neighborhood. The air was cooling rapidly, carrying the crisp scent of pine and impending snow. I walked through my front door and found Liam in the living room, organizing his climbing ropes and checking the integrity of his carabiners for an upcoming expedition. He looked up, his steady gaze immediately registering the slight tension in my shoulders. I did not hide the truth from him. I explained the unexpected visitor, the foreclosure notice, and the sob story about medical debt. Liam did not offer unsolicited advice or performative outrage. He simply walked into the kitchen, poured me a glass of ice water, and kissed my forehead. He provided a grounded reality, a stark contrast to the toxic theater Richard had brought into my firm. I took my water and retreated to my home office. I booted up my dual monitors and waited. At exactly 8 o'clock, an email arrived from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read "Financial Documents" with a brief, overly affectionate message signed by my father. Attached were a dozen encrypted PDF files. I downloaded the files and began my forensic review. I expected to find a chaotic mess of hospital bills, predatory lending agreements, and late fees. I anticipated seeing a family drowning under the weight of the American healthcare system. I opened the first bank statement, adjusting the magnification on my screen to scrutinize the line items. I spent 30 minutes cross-referencing the outgoing payments against the supposed medical debt. The math did not align. The narrative was crumbling under the weight of the raw data. I opened a separate window and pulled up a financial tracking database I use for institutional audits. I isolated a series of recurring high-dollar wire transfers originating from my parents' home equity line of credit. Richard claimed these funds were sent to a specialty neurological clinic out of state to cover Patricia's experimental treatments. I highlighted the routing numbers associated with the receiving accounts. I ran the routing numbers through the clearinghouse database. The search results populated on my right monitor, illuminating the dark room with a glaring, undeniable truth. The receiving institutions were not hospitals. They were not medical research facilities. They were offshore holding accounts frequently utilized by online sportsbooks and high-stakes casinos. The anomaly was blinding. There was no rare neurological condition. There were no experimental treatments. My parents were not losing their home to medical debt. They were losing their home because they were financing a spectacular, reckless gambling addiction. And judging by the secondary signatures on the loan origination documents, the person placing the bets was not my mother. I sat back in my chair, staring at the digital footprint of an elaborate financial crime, realizing my family had not come to me for a rescue. They had come to recruit a patsy. The glow of my dual monitors cast a pale blue light across the dark walls of my home office. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes tracing the rows of digits. The initial shock of discovering the offshore gambling routing numbers faded, quickly replaced by the cold, calculating precision of my financial training. I opened a fresh spreadsheet. I titled it, Liability Audit. I began pulling the raw data from the encrypted PDF files my father had provided. I needed to map the exact dimensions of the crater my family had dug. I started with the home equity line of credit. Richard had claimed they drew upon it to fund experimental treatments for a rare neurological condition. I examined the disbursement log line by line. The transaction dates did not correlate with standard hospital billing cycles or insurance co-payments. They aligned with long holiday weekends in Las Vegas, expensive excursions to coastal resorts, and frequent high-dollar transfers to out-of-state entities. I tracked a specific transaction from last October. A wire transfer for $40,000 caught my attention. The memo line typed next to the routing number read "Contractor fee for property development." I copied the recipient banking information and ran it through a corporate registry database I use for client vetting. The funds did not go to a licensed general contractor. They went to a shell company registered in Delaware. The registered agent for that specific entity was Connor Murphy. My brother had set up a phantom corporation to siphon equity directly from our parents' property. I pulled up the loan origination documents to understand the mechanics of the scheme. To secure a commercial loan of that magnitude, a bank requires verifiable collateral. Connor did not possess viable collateral. He possessed a leased luxury vehicle and a wardrobe of designer suits. I zoomed in on the final signature page of the collateral agreement. There, executed in blue ink, were the signatures of Richard and Patricia Murphy. They had voluntarily pledged their primary residence to guarantee Connor's phantom business venture. They were not naive victims blindsided by a rogue son. They were active participants. They had co-signed the instrument of their own ruin. This was the exact dynamic I had grown up with, scaled up to a federal level. When we were children, Connor once took a baseball bat to a neighbor's greenhouse. Instead of marching him next door to apologize and pay for the glass, my mother hid the bat and told the police a rogue hailstorm caused the damage. They had always constructed elaborate fictions to shield him from consequences. Now the stakes were no longer shattered glass. They were facing bank fraud, wire fraud, and the imminent seizure of their last remaining assets. I kept digging into the transaction history. The spending patterns revealed a lifestyle of grotesque excess. Connor was not just funneling money into offshore sportsbooks. He was sustaining a facade of immense success to impress his social circle. I traced payments for high-end watches, exclusive country club memberships, and private charter flights. He was living like a titan of industry on a budget built entirely of stolen equity. The timeline of their financial collapse became clear. For 3 years, they had managed to meet the minimum monthly interest payments by shuffling funds between various credit cards and secondary loans. It was a classic Ponzi structure reliant on a continuous influx of new debt to service the old debt. But the music had stopped. The credit markets tightened. The lenders demanded verification of the underlying business assets. When Connor could not produce a single legitimate invoice or property deed to justify his commercial loans, the bank initiated the foreclosure process. They were not just losing the house. The commercial lender's loss mitigation department would eventually forward this file to their fraud division. Once an investigator scrutinized those fake contractor fees, Connor would face criminal indictment. The federal government takes a very dim view of using residential equity to fund fraudulent shell companies and offshore gambling syndicates. This explained the desperate, unannounced visit to my office. They did not need a simple bridge loan to cover a medical tragedy. They needed an eraser. They needed my pristine credit rating, my verifiable income, and my liquid capital to pay off the defrauded lender before the bank escalated the matter to the authorities. They wanted me to step in front of the incoming legal bullet. If I assumed the debt, the bank would get their money, the investigation would cease, and Connor would walk away without a single blemish on his record. I would be left holding a worthless, toxic portfolio legally bound to a debt I did not create. They were offering me up as a human shield to save the golden child from a federal penitentiary. I sat back in my chair. The ergonomic mesh supported my spine, but I felt a phantom weight pressing down on my chest. I had spent a decade building a fortress of financial security. I had worked long hours past grueling certification exams and sacrificed personal comforts to ensure I would never have to depend on anyone. My family had looked at my fortress and decided it was the perfect place to dump their toxic waste. The betrayal was so profound, it transcended ordinary anger. It was a marvel of predatory behavior. Richard had sat in my soundproof conference room, squeezed out a fabricated tear, and lied straight to my face about my mother's health. He had weaponized the concept of a terminal illness to extract capital from his estranged daughter. I closed the spreadsheets. I encrypted my analysis folder and backed it up to a secure offline server. Liam walked into the office holding 2 mugs of herbal tea. He set one on my desk and studied my face. He did not ask what I found. He just pulled up a chair and sat next to me, offering a quiet, steady presence that grounded me in the present moment. They are attempting to transfer their fraudulent debt onto my ledger, I told him, keeping my voice low and even. Connor committed bank fraud. My parents enabled him. They want me to pay it off to stop a criminal investigation. Liam took a sip of his tea. His eyes narrowed slightly, processing the magnitude of the deception. What is your next move? I am going to let them think they are succeeding, I replied. I reached for my phone to silence the notifications for the night. As my fingers brushed the screen, the device vibrated. A new text message illuminated the glass. The sender was Patricia. My mother had not sent me a text message in 10 years. Seeing her name on my screen felt like a physical intrusion, a ghost reaching out from the past. I opened the message. The tone was sickeningly sweet, dripping with the false warmth they reserved for moments when they required a favor. Isla, honey, your father told me about your wonderful meeting today. We are so relieved you are willing to help your brother. It has been far too long since we celebrated you. Let us take you out for a belated 28th birthday dinner this Friday. We can catch up, have a beautiful meal, and finalize all the paperwork. We miss you so much. Love, Mom. I read the words twice. The audacity was breathtaking. For 18 years, they had ignored my birthdays, culminating in a melting grocery store cake left on a concrete porch. Now, facing federal fraud charges and the loss of their home, they suddenly wanted to celebrate my birth. They were dangling a fake birthday dinner as the bait to lure me into a financial death trap. I did not reply immediately. I let the silence stretch, calculating the precise angle of my response. I would go to their dinner. I would sit across from them, break bread, and look into their eyes. I would let them lay their trap on the table. The courier arrived at my office reception desk on Wednesday morning. He carried a heavy manila envelope requiring my direct signature. There was no return address printed on the label, but I did not need one. The moment I broke the seal and pulled back the flap, a distinct scent drifted into the sterile, climate-controlled air of my office. It was a cloying synthetic blend of gardenia and vanilla. It was my mother's signature floral perfume. Patricia Murphy sprayed that specific fragrance on every birthday card she ever sent to Connor and every overdue utility bill she handed my father to manage. Smelling it now 1,000 miles away from my childhood home caused a brief, involuntary tightening in my jaw. It was the scent of manufactured innocence, covering a core of pure calculation. I tipped the envelope over my desk. A dense stack of legal paper slid out, landing with a thick thud against my mahogany workspace. 40 pages of fine print bound by a single silver clip. A small handwritten note rested on top of the title page. The cursive letters were neat and practiced. Isla, please review these preliminary documents before our dinner on Friday. This will protect all of us and make us a whole family again. See you soon. Mom, I did not read the packet alone. When you manage wealth in the high country, you learn that navigating treacherous terrain requires consulting an expert who knows the local hazards. I gathered the 40 pages and walked down the hall to the office of Evelyn Vance. Evelyn is our firm's senior estate attorney. She is a sharp, pragmatic woman who possesses a lethal understanding of corporate structuring and asset protection. She has spent 3 decades dismantling predatory contracts for our clients. I placed the stack of paper on Evelyn's glass conference table. I told her my parents wanted me to sign it at dinner to facilitate a bridge loan. Evelyn poured 2 cups of black coffee, handed one to me, and put on her reading glasses. We spent the next 2 hours dissecting the document line by line. The cover page presented the document as a standard family revocable trust. To an untrained eye, it looked like a responsible estate planning tool designed to consolidate generational wealth and avoid probate court. But as we read deeper into the subclauses, the true nature of the architecture revealed itself. It was not a shield. It was a bear trap. Evelyn tapped her manicured fingernail against page 12. She pointed to a section detailing the duties of the appointed trustees. The language was dense and intentionally convoluted, but the legal mechanism was unmistakable. They are asking you to serve as the primary trustee, Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a tone of professional disgust. But look at the funding requirements. This clause mandates that the primary trustee must commingle their personal liquid assets with the trust corpus to satisfy any outstanding encumbrances on the scheduled real estate. I leaned over the table, tracing the text with my own pen. The scheduled real estate was my parents' primary residence, the exact property Connor had fraudulently leveraged to fund his shell company. If I signed this document, my personal financial portfolio would become legally bound to their toxic debt. I would be contractually obligated to liquidate my own earned wealth to pay off the fraudulent commercial loans my brother had secured. It got worse. On page 28, buried under a section regarding beneficiary distributions, was Connor's name. They named your brother as a primary beneficiary with unrestricted drawing rights, Evelyn pointed out, highlighting the paragraph in yellow ink. If you fund this trust to save the house, Connor has the legal authority to withdraw those funds at his discretion. He would have a direct, unobstructed pipeline into your bank accounts. And because the trust explicitly indemnifies the beneficiaries against any mismanagement of funds, you could not even sue him to recover the money once he drained it. The sheer precision of their strategy was breathtaking. They were not just asking for a temporary bailout. They had paid an unscrupulous attorney to draft a weaponized legal snare. They intended to legally shackle me to the sinking ship of Connor's gambling debts, stripping me of my autonomy and my life savings in a single stroke of a pen. They had dressed up financial ruin as a loving family reunion. This was Patricia's specialty. She always utilized formalities to trap people twisting bureaucratic systems to serve her favorite child. When I was 17, I worked 3 jobs to buy a reliable used car to get to my community college classes. Patricia insisted on putting the title in her name, claiming it would secure a lower insurance premium. 2 months later, Connor backed his truck into a neighbor's retaining wall. Instead of making him pay for the damage, my mother took out a title loan on my car to cover his debt. I missed one payment, and the lender repossessed my vehicle. Patricia smiled over dinner that night, patted my hand, and told me that making sacrifices was just part of being a good sister. She was running the exact same play today, scaled up to the millions. She expected me to fall for the illusion of a family dinner sign on the dotted line and hand over my entire future to subsidize her son's crimes. Evelyn took off her reading glasses and tossed them onto the table. This is predatory, Isla. It borders on criminal conspiracy given the underlying fraud you discovered yesterday. If you sign this, you are not just losing your money. You are assuming liability for the fraudulent origination of those commercial loans. When the federal investigators trace the payments back to the offshore casinos, your name will be on the trust that funded them. They are setting you up to take the fall. She reached for the stack of papers, her intent clear. I have a heavy-duty shredder in the copy room. We can destroy this right now. You can block their numbers, cancel the dinner reservation, and let the bank foreclose on them. I looked at the thick manila envelope resting on the glass table. The faint scent of gardenia drifted upward, a sensory reminder of every time I had been told to stay quiet and accept my place in the background. Tearing up the document meant running away. It meant retreating into the silence and hoping they would forget I existed. But I lived in Colorado now. The mountains had taught me that you cannot outrun a predator in deep snow. You have to stand your ground, plant your feet, and use their own momentum against them. Do not shred it, I said. My voice was calm, anchored by a profound sense of clarity. I picked up the 40 pages and tapped the edges against the table to align them. I carried the stack back to my office and closed the door. I sat down at my desk and pulled open the center drawer. I took out my favorite writing instrument, a solid brass fountain pen Liam had gifted me for my certification anniversary. The metal was cool and heavy in my hand, a tangible reminder of the life I had earned. I was not going to skip the dinner. I was going to attend the celebration my mother had so carefully orchestrated. But I was not going to sign their suicide pact. I placed a fresh legal pad on my desk, uncapped the brass pen, and began drafting a counter document. If they wanted to use the law to ensnare me, I would weaponize the very statutes they were attempting to manipulate. I started drafting an irrevocable fiduciary declaration. It was a binding legal instrument designed to formally sever any presumed financial relationship between myself and my family members. More importantly, I included an explicit itemization of the fraudulent shell company transfers I had uncovered during my audit, legally documenting my refusal to participate in their money laundering scheme. I wrote for 3 hours. The NIB of the fountain pen glided across the thick paper, translating decades of neglect into impenetrable legal armor. I would bring my document to their high-end steakhouse dinner. I would let them smile, let them play the roles of proud parents, and let them slide their trap across the table. Then I would slide mine back. The mahogany doors of the downtown Denver steakhouse felt heavy as I pushed them open on Friday evening. The air inside smelled of seared ribeye, melted butter, and expensive oak-aged wine. It was an environment designed for celebration and high-level corporate deal-making. My family had chosen this specific restaurant to project an illusion of invincibility. They wanted me to step into a space of luxurious abundance so I would drop my guard and sign away my life savings. The hostess guided me past the crowded bar to a secluded leather booth in the back corner. They were already seated. Richard, Patricia, and my older brother Connor. I had not seen Connor in 10 years. He wore a tailored navy suit that fit perfectly across his shoulders, and a heavy silver watch gleamed on his left wrist. He looked remarkably relaxed. He looked like a triumphant young executive celebrating a successful quarterly earnings report. He did not look like a desperate fraudster standing on the precipice of a federal indictment. Patricia stood up as I approached the table. She wore a silk blouse and her signature string of pearls. She reached out to embrace me, bathing me in the scent of gardenia and synthetic vanilla. I kept my posture rigid, offering a brief, stiff shoulder before sliding into the empty seat across from her. Richard offered a nervous nod, clutching a highball glass of bourbon with both hands. Connor leaned back against the tufted leather cushion and flashed a brilliant, rehearsed smile. He signaled the waiter with an arrogant flick of his wrist. "Good to see you, little sister," Connor said, his voice carrying an unyarned confidence. I took the liberty of ordering a bottle of the Reserve Cabernet. We have a lot to celebrate tonight. I looked at the wine label. It was a $300 vintage. They were paying for this dinner using the same stolen home equity line they used to fund their offshore gambling accounts. I declined the wine when the waiter attempted to pour my glass, asking for ice water instead. The dinner unfolded as a masterclass in psychological manipulation. They did not immediately bring up the foreclosure or the trust document. Instead, they spent the first hour constructing a fictional reality where Connor was a titan of industry. Patricia fawned over every word he spoke, nodding eagerly as he spun elaborate tales about his real estate developments and his brilliant network of independent contractors. Connor has just been overwhelmed with his new commercial projects. Patricia beamed, reaching across the table to pat his hand. He is building entire communities from the ground up. It takes so much vision to manage that kind of risk. We are just bursting with pride. I took a slow sip of my water. I knew exactly what kind of risk Connor was managing. I had the routing numbers memorized. His contractors were phantom shell companies registered in Delaware. His commercial projects were high-stakes wagers placed through international servers. Yet he sat across from me, slicing into a prime filet mignon, playing the role of the benevolent tycoon. When they finally turned their attention to me, their tone shifted from reverent praise to polite condescension. They treated my presence as a mere transactional necessity, a minor administrative hurdle they needed to clear before dessert. "And how is your little firm doing?" Patricia asked, her gaze drifting toward the dessert menu the waiter had just dropped off. "Still crunching numbers in a cubicle. It must be nice to have a quiet, predictable desk job while your brother is out there taking the big risks." I managed portfolios for some of the wealthiest families in the state. I held advanced financial certifications and operated a corner office with a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains. I had built a fortress of autonomous wealth through a decade of grueling, self-directed labor. Patricia reduced my entire existence to crunching numbers in a cubicle. I did not correct her. Defending my achievements to people committed to misunderstanding me would only drain my energy. I simply nodded and focused on the rhythmic scraping of Connor's steak knife against his china plate. The waiter cleared our dinner plates and returned a few moments later, carrying a pristine white saucer. Resting in the center of the dish was a thick, decadent slice of dark chocolate ganache cake. A single white candle burned brightly on top, casting a flickering glow across the table. Patricia clapped her hands together in delight. "Happy belated birthday, Isla. We wanted to make sure we truly celebrated you tonight." The waiter set the chocolate cake directly in front of me. The rich scent of cocoa wafted upward. I stared at the dark frosting, feeling a cold, familiar hollow open in my chest. I am severely allergic to chocolate. It is not a mild intolerance. It is a severe reaction that causes my throat to swell shut. When I was 6 years old, Patricia baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies for Connor's baseball team and forgot to separate a plain batch for me. I spent 3 days in a pediatric respiratory ward. I had carried an emergency epinephrine injector in my purse every single day since that hospitalization. My family had conveniently forgotten this basic fact for 28 years. The chocolate cake sitting in front of me was a perfect symmetrical echo of the melting grocery store pastry they had left on the concrete porch a decade ago. It was the ultimate proof that they did not know me, did not care to know me, and only viewed me as an instrument to serve their own narrative. As the candle wax began to drip onto the dark frosting, Patricia reached into her designer tote bag. She pulled out the heavy manila envelope containing the predatory 40-page legal document. She placed it on the table right next to the toxic cake. She then reached into her purse again and produced a heavy brass pen, laying it gently on top of the paper. "We know things have been distant," Patricia said, her voice dropping into a hushed emotional register designed to emulate genuine sorrow. "But your brother needs this bridge loan to finalize his latest development. If you sign this trust document, you can manage the funds and help us protect the family home. This signature will finally make us a whole family again." Richard watched me with wide, anxious eyes. Connor took a slow sip of his expensive wine, waiting for his younger sister to blindly assume the liability for his federal crimes. They expected me to crave their validation so deeply that I would ignore the glaring red flags and sign away my future. They thought I was still the 18-year-old girl hoping for a seat at their table. I did not break eye contact with my mother. I reached out and pushed the plate holding the chocolate cake a few inches away from me. I then placed my index finger on the manila envelope and pushed it back across the mahogany table toward her. I offered them a bright, flawless fiduciary smile. "I cannot eat that cake," I stated, keeping my voice smooth and professional. "And I do not sign binding legal instruments in restaurants over dessert. If we are going to execute a trust involving significant real estate assets, we will do it properly and legally. I require the signing to be done formally. Meet me at my title office on Monday morning at 9. Saturday morning arrived with the sharp, thin chill characteristic of high-altitude autumns. I woke at 4 o'clock. Liam was already in the kitchen organizing climbing ropes and checking the water reservoirs in our packs. We drove out of Denver in the dark, heading west toward the towering silhouette of Mount Bierstadt. We reached the trailhead just as the sun began to breach the horizon, painting the jagged peaks in hues of bruised purple and pale gold. The ascent was a grueling, unforgiving process. Climbing a 14,000-foot mountain requires a rhythmic, almost meditative focus. Every step demands oxygen that the thin air refuses to provide. The granite beneath my hiking boots was cold and rough. I concentrated on the physical sensation of the climb. I felt the burn in my quadriceps and the steady, demanding rhythm of my heart. In Colorado, the terrain dictates a strict economy of movement. You do not waste energy on unnecessary strides. You measure every ounce of water, every protein bar, and every piece of safety gear you put into your bag. The fundamental rule of the backcountry is that you only carry the weight you choose to carry. For 28 years, I had unwittingly functioned as my family's designated pack mule. I'd hauled the heavy, invisible burden of their insecurities, their manufactured crises, and my brother's inevitable failures. When Connor failed his high school chemistry class, my parents grounded me for not tutoring him adequately. When he crashed his first car into a street lamp, my mother demanded I hand over my own savings to cover his insurance deductible, claiming it was my duty to support my sibling. I had spent my entire life carrying a load that did not belong to me, believing that bearing their weight was the only way to earn a place in their household. We reached the summit shortly before noon. The wind whipped across the exposed ridge, biting at my cheeks. I stood on the edge of the rock face and looked down at the vast sweeping valleys far below. Liam stood beside me in companionable silence, offering a canteen of water. I took a slow drink. In that freezing, pristine air, I made a conscious physical choice. I unbuckled the invisible harness. I stepped out from under their debt. I would no longer carry the consequences of their actions. We descended the mountain before the afternoon storms could roll in. By Sunday morning, my mind was clear. I sat at the broad desk in my home office and began the final phase of my preparation. I treated my own life with the same ruthless fiduciary care I provided my most valued clients. Evelyn Vance had warned me that my parents would use my wealth as a target. The most effective defense against a financial predator is to remove the target from the board entirely. I spent hours finalizing a series of legal barriers. I established a nested corporate structure transferring my liquid capital, my property, equity, and my investment portfolios into specialized limited liability companies. I removed my individual name from every vulnerable asset. I executed the irrevocable fiduciary declaration I had drafted earlier in the week. This document explicitly severed any presumed financial relationship between myself and my biological relatives. I utilized a mobile notary service I kept on retainer. A quiet professional arrived at my townhouse, checked my identification, and stamped the seal on every single page. When the ink dried, I gathered my personal estate documents into a neat stack. I walked over to this corner of my office and dialed the combination on my floor safe. I placed my newly minted legal armor inside the reinforced steel box. I pushed the heavy door closed. The metallic thud of the fireproof safe locking shut echoed in the quiet room. It was a definitive, deeply satisfying sound. I had permanently partitioned my life. My assets were bulletproof. With my defense secure, I turned my attention to the offense. I opened a fresh manila folder. It looked identical to the envelope my mother had placed next to the chocolate cake at the steakhouse, but the contents were infinitely more dangerous. I was not building a trap based on emotion. I was building a dossier of raw, indisputable data. I printed the commercial loan origination forms, highlighting the sections bearing the notarized signatures of Richard and Patricia Murphy. They had willfully pledged their primary residence to secure funding for a fraudulent enterprise. I printed the clearinghouse routing numbers linking their home equity line directly to offshore gambling syndicates. I included the Delaware corporate registry documents proving Connor was the sole registered agent of the Phantom Shell Company receiving the stolen funds. I categorized each piece of evidence with labeled tabs and a summary index. It was a comprehensive forensic map of a federal crime ready for review by any title officer or law enforcement agency. I closed the manila folder and placed it in my leather briefcase. Everything was ready for Monday morning. The sun dipped behind the foothills, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor of my office. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes, enjoying the profound quiet of my home. Then my cell phone vibrated on the desk. The screen illuminated, displaying Connor's name. I did not answer. I sat motionless and watched the phone vibrate across the polished wood surface. My brother had always possessed a staggering sense of entitlement. He operated under the assumption that the world existed to facilitate his desires, and any delay was a personal insult. He expected me to rush to his aid the moment he snapped his fingers. When I did not answer the call, his impatience predictably boiled over. 2 minutes later, an alert chimed. A new voicemail notification appeared on the screen. I picked up the phone. I connected an external digital recorder to the audio jack to ensure a pristine copy. I tapped play. Connor's voice filled the room. The polished, triumphant tone he had utilized at the steakhouse was entirely gone. In its place was the raw, frantic aggression of a man who felt his control slipping. "Isla, pick up the phone," he ordered. His breath hitched, betraying a deep underlying panic. "I do not have time for these little power plays. You are going to show up at that title office tomorrow morning, and you are going to sign the trust document. If you try to stall, or if you refuse to transfer the funds, I will make you pay. I know where you work. I know your boss. I will march into your fancy firm and tell them you are stealing from your own sick mother. I will drag your reputation through the dirt until you lose every license you have. Stop being a selfish brat and do what you are told. Sign the paper tomorrow or I will ruin you." The recording ended with a sharp click. The silence returned to my office heavier than before. Connor thought he was applying pressure. He believed fear would force me into compliance. He did not realize he had just handed me the final missing piece of my defense. He had provided exact recorded audio evidence of extortion and coercion. I saved the digital file, backed it up to a secure cloud server, and dropped the recorder into my briefcase right next to the manila folder. The trap was now fully armed and they were sprinting toward it. Monday morning broke over Denver with a brilliant, unforgiving clarity. The sky was a pale, icy blue, and the air held the sharp bite of impending winter. While I stood in my kitchen drinking black coffee and running through my legal strategy, my family was enjoying a lavish breakfast at a high-end boutique hotel downtown. They had booked the suite on a credit card they could not afford to pay off, operating under the assumption that my signature would erase their balance by noon. Patricia sat in a velvet lobby chair, a $20 cappuccino resting on the table beside her. She swiped her manicured finger across the screen of her tablet, scrolling through luxury real estate listings and high-end furniture catalogs. She was already mentally spending the liquidity she believed I was about to sign over. To my mother, my decade of grueling labor and disciplined saving was nothing more than a convenient reservoir of cash waiting to be tapped. She leaned over to show Richard a set of custom-imported patio furniture. She told him it would look perfect on their back deck once the unpleasant business with the bank was finalized. Richard nodded, his eyes tired and bloodshot from sleepless nights, but he offered a weak smile. He allowed her delusion to comfort him, preferring the fantasy of my compliance over the reality of their impending ruin. A few feet away, Connor paced the length of the hotel lobby, speaking loudly into his cell phone. He wore a fresh suit and expensive leather loafers, projecting the image of a thriving entrepreneur. He was talking to a golf acquaintance using business buzzwords to mask his desperation. He bragged that he was just wrapping up a minor liquidity restructuring and securing a fresh influx of capital from a private family office. He laughed, a hollow, arrogant sound that echoed off the marble walls of the hotel. He truly believed he had outsmarted the system. He thought he could borrow against stolen equity, gamble the funds away through offshore syndicates, and simply bully his younger sister into covering his tracks. The arrogance was blinding. It insulated him from the very real consequences bearing down on him. Across town, in the quiet sanctuary of my townhouse, I prepared for the execution. I did not feel fear. I felt the steady, measured calm of a professional about to close a highly volatile account. I dressed with deliberate care. I put on a crisp white shirt and my tailored charcoal blazer, the uniform of my trade. The fabric felt heavy and protective, a layer of armor designed for boardrooms and tense negotiations. I walked over to my desk and picked up the small digital recorder. I pressed a button, verifying the audio file one last time. Connor's frantic, threatening voice filled my office, demanding I sign the paperwork and promising to ruin my professional reputation if I refused. The playback was crystal clear. I turned the device off and slid it into the interior breast pocket of my blazer. The hard plastic and metal rested against my ribs. It was a tangible reminder of the truth I carried. I picked up my leather briefcase, ensuring the thick manila folder rested securely inside, and walked out the door. The drive into the financial district was smooth. The morning traffic flowed in a predictable, orderly stream, a stark contrast to the chaotic emotional theater my family brought wherever they went. Denver is a city that respects preparation. The towering glass skyscrapers reflect a culture built on contracts, verified assets, and concrete data. I parked in the underground garage of the title office building and took the elevator to the 14th floor. I was 45 minutes early. The reception area of the title firm was hushed and professional. I requested access to the reserved conference room and asked the receptionist to notify the neutral third-party attorney and the senior title officer that I had arrived ahead of schedule. Within minutes, Thomas Brent and Elena Rostova entered the room. Thomas was a veteran estate lawyer, a man in his late 50s with a calm demeanor and a reputation for facilitating complex family wealth transfers. Elena was a meticulous title officer responsible for ensuring the legal integrity of the property deeds changing hands. They took their seats expecting a brief routine discussion before my parents arrived to execute a standard revocable trust. I did not offer them small talk. I placed my briefcase on the table, unlatched the brass locks, and pulled out the thick manila folder. I set it squarely in the center of the polished wood surface. "Mr. Brent, Ms. Rostova." I began, my voice flat and devoid of conversational warmth. "My family is arriving in 30 minutes to execute a trust document they provided to you last week. They intend to use that document to leverage my personal liquid assets against the equity of their primary residence. Before they enter this room, I am legally and ethically obligated to hand you the true agenda for this morning." Thomas frowned slightly, adjusting his reading glasses. "Isla, if there is a dispute regarding the terms of the trust, we can certainly negotiate the clauses when your parents arrive. We want everyone to feel comfortable with the asset transfer." "This is not a negotiation of terms," I replied. "This is a disclosure of fraud." I opened the folder. I handed Thomas the printed corporate registry documents and the wire transfer logs. I handed Elena the commercial loan origination papers bearing my parents' notarized signatures. I instructed them to review the data. I explained that the underlying collateral they were attempting to bind to the trust was tied to a phantom shell company registered in Delaware. I detailed the routing numbers that sent the stolen equity to offshore gambling syndicates. I informed them that my brother, the primary beneficiary listed in their drafted trust, was the architect of the scheme, and my parents were his active co-signers. The professional ease drained from their faces in an instant. The atmosphere in the conference room shifted from a routine administrative meeting to the site of an active forensic investigation. Thomas picked up the wire transfer logs, his eyes scanning the highlighted routing numbers. The color left his cheeks. Elena reviewed the collateral agreements, her lips pressed into a thin, grim line. They were highly trained professionals who understood personal liability. They knew exactly what they were looking at. They were looking at an attempt to use their licenses to launder stolen money. "My family believes they are walking into a standard closing," I told the two silent professionals. "They believe they are going to slide a piece of paper across this table and walk away with a clean ledger. I am asking you to remain in your seats when they arrive. I need you to witness their presentation." Thomas set the papers down. He looked at me, a newfound respect replacing his polite greeting. He gave a single slow nod. Elena folded her hands on top of the desk, her posture rigid with professional outrage. They understood their role. They were no longer facilitators. They were witnesses. I gathered the evidence, placed it back into the manila folder, and waited. The digital recorder sat heavy in my blazer pocket. The analog clock on the wall ticked forward, measuring the final minutes of a 30-year illusion. At precisely 9 o'clock, the heavy glass doors of the suite swung open. The noise arrived before they did. I could hear Patricia's performative musical laugh echoing in the hallway, accompanied by Connor's booming, confident voice. They were greeting the receptionist, exuding the false warmth of people who believed they had already won. They approached the conference room. The brass handle turned. Richard, Patricia, and Connor walked into the room, their faces arranged in identical, triumphant smiles. They took their seats across from me, brimming with arrogant delusion. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, sealing the room. They had no idea the sound of that latch was the lid of a trap falling into place. Patricia settles into the leather executive chair directly across from me. She arranges her designer handbag on the floor and smooths the lapels of her silk blouse with deliberate, practiced movements. The false warmth radiates from her smile. It is an expression honed at countless charity galas back in our hometown, where the primary goal was to appear affluent, regardless of the actual bank balance. Richard sits to her left. He loosens his tie, attempting to project the relaxed demeanor of a patriarch handling routine estate planning. Connor takes the seat to her right. He leans back, crossing one ankle over his knee. His posture occupies more space than necessary, an intentional display of physical dominance meant to shrink everyone else in the room. He nods at Thomas and Elena, treating the veteran attorney and the senior title officer like junior interns hired to fetch his coffee. The silence in the conference room stretches. It is a heavy, expectant quiet, the kind that precedes a sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. Patricia breaks the stillness with a sound I have heard my entire life. Her manicured fingernails tap an impatient, entitled rhythm against the polished mahogany table. It is the rhythmic pulse of her expectations signaling that the supporting cast needs to hurry up and perform their designated duties. "It is so wonderful to get everyone together," Patricia announces. Her voice carries a theatrical lilt designed to disarm the professionals in the room. "Thank you all for accommodating us this morning. We know how busy everyone is, but family business always takes priority." She looks at me, her eyes shining with manufactured affection. "Right, Isla." I do not return the smile. I look at her tapping fingers and remain silent. The lack of a compliant response causes a microscopic tightening at the corners of her mouth. The illusion of a happy reunion requires two participants, and my refusal to play the assigned role creates a sudden, uncomfortable friction. Out here, respect is earned through rigorous honesty, not empty pleasantries. Connor steps in to manage the perceived awkwardness. He has always operated as the family spokesman, the charming deflector of accountability. When he failed his driving test twice in high school, he convinced our parents the instructor harbored a personal vendetta against him. He possesses an uncanny ability to rewrite reality through sheer, unearned confidence. He places his elbows on the table and leans forward, adopting the tone of a magnanimous older brother guiding his naive sibling through a complex adult world. "Let us keep this straightforward," Connor dictates. He reaches into his leather portfolio and extracts the 40-page family revocable trust document. It is bound in a heavy blue cover looking official and binding. He places it on the mahogany surface and slides it across the table toward me. The heavy paper slides with a soft, insidious hiss. "The legal jargon is pretty thick in there, Isla," Connor says, offering a patronizing chuckle. "You do not need to worry your pretty head about the fine print. Mom and Dad had a top-tier firm draft the clauses to make sure everyone is protected. It essentially just pools our resources so I can finalize this new commercial development cycle. Once the property's clear, escrow the returns will cover the principal. You just need to sign the last page and the notary here can stamp it." He gestures vaguely toward Elena, failing to even use her proper title. He expects me to pick up the pen and sign away my autonomy without reading a single paragraph. This was the established dynamic of our youth. I was expected to absorb the technicalities, clean up the mess, and never ask questions. When Connor shattered a window playing indoor baseball, I was the one handed the broom while he received a lecture on proper batting stance. They operated on the assumption that my compliance was a permanent, unchangeable trait. Richard clears his throat, offering a supportive nod to his son. "Connor has done a remarkable job structuring this, Isla. It is a relief to have the financial burdens managed so efficiently. We just need your signature to finalize the transfer. Then we can all go out for a nice lunch to celebrate." They sit back and wait. They expect the weight of familial duty to crush any professional skepticism. They expect the 18-year-old girl who walked to the bus station in the dark to re-emerge and accept whatever scraps they offer. They assume my career as a financial advisor is merely a title, cute hobby that pales in comparison to Connor's imaginary corporate conquests. I look at the document resting in front of me. I do not reach for my pen. I channel the cold, clear altitude of a mountain summit. I do not experience anger. Anger implies a loss of control, a reaction to an unexpected injury. I am not injured. I am prepared. I experience the flat, emotionless focus of a fiduciary managing a hostile takeover. In corporate defense, you do not argue with a hostile bidder. You do not debate the merits of their predatory offer. You simply deny the acquisition. The air in the room feels sterile, devoid of the toxic emotional static they brought through the door. Thomas and Elena sit frozen at the edges of the table, their professional composure masking the profound shock of witnessing this charade. They know what Connor is attempting to do. They have seen the routing numbers. They are watching a man try to hand his sister a live grenade and call it a gift. They remain silent, acting as the neutral witnesses I required. I place my fingertips on the blue cover of the trust document. I apply an even pressure and slide the 40 pages back across the polished wood. The document comes to rest directly in front of Connor. It remains unsigned. Connor blinks. The patronizing smile falters, replaced by a flash of genuine confusion. He looks at the unsigned paper, then back up at me. He is accustomed to the world bending to his narrative. He does not comprehend the concept of an immovable object. Isla. Patricia says, her voice losing its theatrical lilt, replaced by a sharp warning edge. What are you doing? We have a lunch reservation. Just sign the paperwork so we can move forward. I do not sign documents that obligate my clients or myself to fraudulent terms. I state. My voice is measured a steady baritone that cuts through their manufactured reality. I reach into my leather briefcase resting on the floor beside my chair. I extract the thick manila folder I prepared over the weekend. The heavy stock paper feels substantial in my grasp. I lift the folder and place it squarely in the center of the mahogany table directly between their predatory contract and my side of the desk. The sound of the folder hitting the wood echoes in the quiet room, a definitive, unyielding thud that halts Patricia's tapping fingernails. I fold my hands on top of the manila cover, looking at my family with the clinical detachment of an auditor who has just found the missing funds. I do not need to worry my head about your fine print, Connor, I say, keeping my gaze locked on his. Because I have conducted a full audit of your ledgers. The crisp, sharp sound of the manila folder flipping open shattered the manufactured peace of the conference room. It was a simple noise, just heavy paper folding back against itself, but it echoed like a gavel striking wood. I extracted the first document from the stack. It was the commercial loan disbursement log printed on high-contrast paper to ensure every digit stood out. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at my brother. I directed my gaze entirely toward Thomas Brent and Elena Rostova, the two neutral professionals sitting at the edges of the table. On October 12th of last year, I began, my voice steady and measured. A wire transfer in the amount of $40,000 was initiated from the home equity line of credit attached to the property located at 412 Elmwood Drive. I slid the printed log across the polished mahogany, orienting the text so Thomas could read it. The memo line on this specific transaction designates the funds as a contractor fee for property development. I continued. However, a routine verification of the receiving routing number reveals the destination was not a licensed general contractor. I pulled a second sheet of paper from the folder. It was the corporate registry filing from the state of Delaware. The funds were diverted to a shell entity, I stated. The sole registered agent for this entity is Connor Murphy. The receiving account is a holding tank utilized to funnel capital into offshore sportsbooks. Connor shifted in his leather chair. The leather creaked, a sudden nervous friction that betrayed the calm facade he had worn into the building. When we were younger, he ran a similar scheme on a much smaller scale. He sold a stolen bicycle to a neighborhood kid, claiming he had rebuilt the gears himself. When the parents came to our front door demanding a refund, Patricia hid Connor in the basement and told the neighbors the boy must have broken the bike out of carelessness. She protected his lies, then validating his belief that reality was negotiable. Now he sat at a corporate closing table, discovering that federal banking regulations do not bend to a mother's excuses. Isla, Patricia interrupted. Her tone was sharp-laced with a rising panic she tried to disguise as maternal disappointment. This is highly inappropriate. We are here to discuss a simple family trust, not to pick apart your brother's business expenses. Family loyalty means we support each other, not drag each other down over petty accounting errors. You are being ungrateful, Richard added, his voice thin and reedy. After everything we provided for you. You sit there and interrogate your own blood. We came here in good faith to include you in a wealth-building opportunity. I ignored them. Engaging with emotional manipulation gives it power. It legitimizes the tantrum. I treated their voices like static on a radio, filtering out the noise to focus on the data. I pulled the third document from my folder. To secure the commercial loans funneling cash into this shell entity, I said, addressing the attorney, a pledge of collateral was required. A lender demands verifiable assets to underwrite a high-risk venture. I slid the loan origination agreement across the table, placing it directly next to the Delaware registry filing. This agreement pledges the primary residence at Elmwood Drive as collateral, I explained. The signatures on the final page belong to Richard and Patricia Murphy. They executed this document encumbering their property to guarantee a phantom business. Patricia slapped her palm against the table. The sharp smack caused Elena to flinch. You have no right to steal those documents, Patricia yelled. The polished charity gala smile was gone, replaced by a rigid, trembling mask of indignation. "Those are private records. You are violating our privacy. You should be thanking us for offering you a role in this trust." I picked up the trust document Connor had slid toward me minutes earlier. I held it up for Thomas to see. "The mathematics of this proposed trust are a fiction," I stated. I kept my breathing, even maintaining the flat cadence of a fiduciary presenting a routine quarterly report. "The outstanding principal on the commercial loans exceeds the total appraised value of the primary residence. There is zero equity remaining. If I sign this document and commingle my personal liquid assets with the trust corpus, my capital will be immediately seized by the creditors to satisfy the defaulted loans. This instrument is not designed to consolidate wealth. It is designed to liquidate my savings to cover a fraudulent debt." Connor leaned forwards, his face flushing a deep mottled red. The arrogant tycoon persona evaporated, leaving behind a cornered, desperate man. "You do not understand how commercial development works," he sneered. He pointed a finger at me across the table. "It takes capital to scale. The returns are coming in next quarter. You are just trying to sabotage me because you are jealous. You have always been jealous that Mom and Dad believed in my vision instead of your boring desk job." I did not react to the insult. I turned the page on my legal pad. "Using a residential equity line to secure commercial funding under false pretenses constitutes a violation of federal law." I read, reciting the statutes I had verified with Evelyn over the weekend. Specifically Title 18 United States Code Section 1444 regarding bank fraud and Section 1443 regarding wire fraud. The penalties include significant fines and federal imprisonment. The mention of federal statutes fundamentally altered the air pressure in the room. The abstract concept of a family disagreement vanished. The reality of a criminal enterprise took its place. "Stop talking," Richard ordered. He stood up from his chair, pointing at me with a shaking hand. "You shut your mouth right now, Isla. You do not speak to your brother that way. You do not throw around legal terms you do not understand. You are going to sign that paper, or you are no longer a part of this family." I looked at Richard. I noted the sweat beading on his forehead and the frantic darting of his eyes. "I ceased being a part of this family the night you left my birthday cake on the porch and drove to a ski resort," I replied. The words contained no venom. They were a simple statement of historical fact. I shifted my focus back to Thomas Brent. The veteran attorney sat perfectly still. He was staring at the commercial loan agreement and the Delaware registry filing resting on the table in front of him. His eyes scanned the highlighted routing numbers and the notarized signatures. He was a man who had built a 30-year career on navigating complex estate law while meticulously protecting his own professional license. He recognized the exact shape of the liability sitting on the mahogany table. The emotional theater my parents were performing meant nothing to him. The tears, the shouting, the demands for loyalty were irrelevant. Thomas saw the clinical data. He saw a fraudulent scheme engineered to launder money through a revocable trust, and he saw his own name listed as the facilitating attorney on the cover page of that trust. Patricia reached across the table, attempting to snatch the bank statements away from my side of the folder. I placed my hand flat over the paper, pinning it to the wood. "This is a private family matter," Patricia insisted, turning her desperate gaze toward Thomas. "Mr. Brent, please ignore her. She has always been prone to these dramatic outbursts. She just wants attention. If you can just point out where she needs to sign, we can finish this and leave." Thomas did not look at Patricia. He slowly raised his head and looked at Connor. The silence that fell over the conference room was sudden and absolute. The ambient hum of the air conditioning unit became the only sound. Thomas reached out and picked up his heavy brass pen. He did not uncap it to sign the trust document. He deliberately slid it into the leather loop inside his briefcase. He gathered his notepad, his reading glasses, and his cell phone with methodical, precise movements. "Mr. Brent," Connor asked. His voice cracked the aggressive bravado, replaced by a sudden creeping terror. "What are you doing? We just need to finalize the signatures." Thomas closed his briefcase. The brass latches snapped shut with a sharp metallic finality. He placed his hands on the edge of the mahogany table and pushed his chair back. The chair legs scraped against the carpet, a harsh sound that signaled the abrupt termination of the proceedings. "I am an officer of the court," Thomas stated. His voice was cold, professional, and entirely devoid of the polite customer service tone he had used upon their arrival. I was retained to facilitate the lawful transfer of generational assets. I was not retained to aid in the commission of wire fraud. He stood up, distancing his body from the table, from the documents, and from my family. This meeting is over. Thomas Brent did not just walk away. A professional of his caliber leaves no room for ambiguity. He reached across the mahogany table and pulled the blue-bound family revocable trust back toward his side. He unclasped his briefcase, retrieved a thick permanent marker, and removed the cap. The sharp scent of ink briefly cut through the sterile conference room air. With a firm, deliberate motion, he drew a thick diagonal line across the primary signature page. He wrote the word void in large, undeniable capital letters. The final authoritative click of the attorney capping his pen echoed off the glass walls. He slid the marker into its designated leather loop and secured his briefcase. As an officer of the court, Thomas stated, directing his stern gaze at Richard and Patricia, I am mandated to uphold the integrity of the legal system. I cannot notarize a document designed to shield assets from legitimate creditors. I will not facilitate a trust built on a foundation of fraudulent commercial loans. Your paperwork is legally defective. It is invalidated. Elena stood up beside him, gathering her own files. Capital Title Services will not insure this transaction, she added, her voice equally resolute. We are flagging the property profile in our system. No reputable underwriter will touch this deed knowing the equity is tied to offshore gambling syndicates. Good day. They turned and walked out of the room. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them. The departure of the neutral third parties sucked the remaining oxygen from the space. The polite societal constraints that governed my family's public behavior vanished the second the professionals exited. Without an audience to impress, the performance ceased. Patricia sat frozen for a fraction of a second, staring at the ruined document resting on the table. The blue cover was stained with the black ink of a voided future. When she lifted her head to look at me, the polished, affluent mother from the hotel lobby was gone. In her place sat the woman I remembered from my childhood. The woman who locked me out of the house on my 18th birthday. Her facial muscles tightened, drawing her skin taut over her cheekbones. Her eyes hardened into dark, unforgiving focal points. You selfish, ungrateful girl, Patricia hissed. The veneer of grace shattered, exposing the raw cruelty underneath. You sat there and humiliated us in front of strangers. You ruined a perfectly viable business arrangement just to settle some petty childhood grudge. She pushed her chair back and stood up, leaning over the table. The gardenia perfume mixed with the scent of her nervous perspiration, creating a cloying, suffocating aroma. We raised you! She screamed, her voice losing its measured cadence and climbing into a shrill, piercing register. We put a roof over your head. We fed you. We gave you everything you needed to succeed, and this is how you repay your blood. You owe us. You have an obligation to this family. You have more than enough capital sitting in your accounts to fix this problem. You are going to call that attorney back in here, apologize for your little tantrum, and fix your brother's situation right now. I remained seated. I did not flinch, nor did I break eye contact. The Rocky Mountains teach a vital lesson about sudden storms. When a squall hits above the tree line, you do not panic and you do not run. You anchor yourself to the rock and let the wind howl around you until it depletes its own energy. Patricia was a storm running out of moisture. She was screaming because volume was the only tool she had left. I owe you nothing, I replied, my voice maintaining the flat, unaffected tone of a financial audit. I paid for my own clothes. I funded my own education. I built my own career. The only thing you ever provided was a masterclass in how to prioritize one child at the expense of another. Richard stepped forward, positioning himself beside his wife. His face was flushed, the veins in his neck bulging against his limp collar. He had spent his entire life avoiding conflict by enabling Patricia's worst impulses and covering for Connor's failures. Now facing the catastrophic collapse of his own financial security, he fell back on the patriarchal authority he had surrendered decades ago. Do not speak to your mother that way, Richard demanded, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. And you will show some respect for your brother. Connor is trying to navigate a complex commercial crisis. He took risks to elevate this family's standing. You sit in a safe, predictable job judging a man who actually stepped into the arena. You do not understand the pressure he is under. You need to stop this nonsense, transfer the funds, and support him. Respect is earned through accountability, I stated. Connor did not step into an arena. He committed a federal offense. He stole your equity to place wagers on a server in another country. Supporting him means participating in a felony. The clinical truth of my statement stripped away the last remnants of Connor's composure. The charming, magnanimous tycoon vanished, replaced by the cornered, hostile bully he had always been. When we were teenagers, Connor used his size and volume to intimidate anyone who questioned his narrative. If a teacher questioned a plagiarized essay, he would loom over their desk using physical proximity to force a passing grade. He relied on the assumption that people would rather surrender than endure a physical confrontation. He pushed away from the table, his chair hitting the wall behind him with a loud crash. He took 2 long strides toward my side of the room. He planted his hands on the mahogany surface, leaning his upper body toward me, casting a shadow over my seat. His face was inches from mine, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched. "You think you are so smart," Connor growled. The polished veneer was stripped down to sheer rage. "You think you can play judge and jury with my life? You are nothing, Isla. You are a glorified accountant playing dress-up. I am not going to let you walk out of this building and ruin my deals." He reached out his hand, hovering over the manila folder resting on the table as if intending to seize the evidence and destroy it by force. "You are going to sign a blank check," he threatened, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "You are going to cover the shortfall on the loans, and you are going to keep your mouth shut. Because if you do not, I will make it my personal mission to destroy everything you have built in this city. I will ensure you lose your licenses, your clients, and your career." He expected me to recoil. He expected the 18-year-old girl who used to shrink into the background to resurface and submit to his demands. He believed that physical intimidation could override empirical data. I did not shrink. I did not lean away from him. I held my ground, channeling the quiet resilience forged on countless frozen summits. "Your threats are as empty as your bank accounts, Connor," I said calmly. I reached into the interior breast pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer. My fingers located the cool, hard plastic of the digital recorder. I withdrew the small device and placed it on the table right next to the voided trust document. I did not offer a dramatic speech. I did not raise my voice to compete with his. I simply pressed my thumb against the play button. A sharp electronic beep echoed in the room, followed immediately by the undeniable frantic sound of Connor's own voice. "Isla, pick up the phone." The recording broadcasted the audio crisp and clear in the silent conference room. "I do not have time for these little power plays. You are going to show up at that title office tomorrow morning, and you are going to sign the trust document. If you try to stall or if you refuse to transfer the funds, I will make you pay." The recorded voice filled the space, playing back the exact extortion he had attempted the night before. "I will drag your reputation through the dirt until you lose every license you have." The audio continued, echoing the threats he had just spoken seconds ago. "Sign the paper tomorrow, or I will ruin you." The recording clicked off, plunging the room back into a heavy, suffocating silence. Connor froze, his hand still hovering over the table, his face draining of color. The realization of what he was hearing washed over him, shattering his offensive stance. Patricia gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. Richard stared at the small black device as if it were a live explosive. They had walked into my office expecting to manipulate a vulnerable daughter. They had no idea they were dealing with a woman who recorded every single liability. The sharp click of the recording device shutting off left a vacuum in the room. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by one persistent sound. The office air conditioning unit hummed steadily above us, a cool, unbothered mechanical rhythm. That crisp, regulated airflow contrasted sharply with the ragged, hyperventilating breaths escaping my brother's lungs. Connor withdrew his hands from the mahogany table, stumbling a half-step backward. His physical intimidation tactics. The posturing he had relied on since our teenage years to force his way through life dissolved in an instant. You cannot intimidate an audio file. You cannot physically menace digital evidence into erasing itself. Connor stared at the spot on the table where the recorder had been his chest, heaving his eyes wide and frantic. He looked like a man who had stepped off a curb assuming the street was empty, only to feel the grill of a speeding freight train pressing against his ribs. Patricia remained frozen in her executive chair. Her hands trembled visibly in her lap, the expensive fabric of her silk blouse vibrating with her unspoken panic. Richard appeared physically ill. His complexion shifted to a pale grayish hue, the reality of his enabling finally catching up to his cardiovascular system. "You recorded me," Connor whispered. His voice lacked any trace of its former bravado. It was a hollow, breathy sound, the vocalization of a man recognizing the ground giving way beneath his feet. "You recorded your own flesh and blood. I documented an attempted extortion," I corrected him. I retrieved the small black device and returned it to the interior pocket of my tailored blazer. "When you demand that a financial professional commit a crime under the threat of professional sabotage, you forfeit the privilege of family privacy." I clasped my hands together, resting them on the cover of my manila folder. I needed them to understand the exact mechanics of the trap they had walked into. I needed them to see that my career was not just a title they could exploit. When I sat for my Series 7 and Series 66 licensing exams, I did not merely memorize economic models. I explained maintaining the flat instructional cadence I used during quarterly client reviews. I swore a binding oath to uphold rigorous ethical standards. I operate under strict fiduciary duty. That means I am legally obligated to protect the integrity of the financial systems I navigate. You looked at my career and saw a convenient loophole. You saw a quiet girl with a desk job who could be bullied into fixing your mistakes. You failed to comprehend the legal reality of the licenses I hold. I thought about the years I spent studying in a cramped, unheated apartment living on instant noodles and cheap coffee. I studied late into the night knowing that failure meant returning to their orbit, returning to a house where my only purpose was to serve as a backdrop to Connor's achievements. I built my independence through statutory compliance and relentless discipline. They had tried to take that pristine record and use it to sanitize their filth. When you handed me that 40-page trust document, I continued, making sure my voice reached every corner of the soundproof room. You crossed a critical legal threshold. You did not just ask for a familial favor. You presented a structured contract intended to commingle legitimate capital with the proceeds of an offshore gambling debt. You attempted to recruit a licensed financial advisor to launder stolen money. Richard raised a trembling hand as if trying to physically block my words from reaching his ears. "Isla, please," he croaked, his voice cracking under the strain. "We did not know. We did not mean to put you in any legal jeopardy. We can just tear up the papers right now. We can walk out of this building, throw the trust in the trash, and pretend this meeting never happened." I shook my head slowly, feeling a deep, sustaining sense of closure. The time for pretending had expired. "Federal law mandates strict protocols for situations like this," I stated. "Under the anti-money laundering regulations established by the Bank Secrecy Act, a financial advisor cannot simply decline to participate in a suspected laundering scheme and walk away. The law dictates mandatory reporting. If I conceal a felony of this scale, I become an accessory after the fact. I lose my career, my freedom, and everything I have built over the past decade. Did you genuinely believe I would risk federal prison to cover a debt you created?" Patricia let out a short, stifled gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between me and the heavy oak door as if calculating the distance to an exit. I opened the brass clasps of my leather briefcase one final time. I bypassed the thick manila folder holding my audit and reached into a side pocket. I extracted a single sheet of standard printer paper. It was not bound in a heavy blue cover. It lacked the theatrical weight of their fraudulent trust. It was just a plain black and white printout. I placed the paper on the mahogany table and slid it across the smooth wood until it came to rest directly in front of Connor. He looked down at it, but he did not reach for it. He seemed terrified that touching the paper would make it real. "That is a submission receipt," I told him, ensuring my enunciation was flawless. "I am legally prohibited from warning you about an impending investigation, but since you attempted to extort me on tape, the parameters have shifted. I filed a comprehensive suspicious activity report regarding your shell company transfers." I submitted the full digital dossier, including the forged collateral agreements and the offshore routing numbers. Connor stared at the alphanumeric confirmation code printed at the top of the page. His jaw slacked, the muscles twitching as his brain struggled to process the information. I filed the report with the state banking authority. I continued dropping the final irreversible anvil. I also submitted a duplicate file to the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The timestamp on that receipt confirms the transmission was completed at 8 o'clock this morning. 1 hour before you walked into this room. I watched their faces contort as the weight of my words settled over them. For 28 years, they had operated under the assumption that actions carried no consequences as long as you kept the damage inside the family. They believed blood was a permanent pardon. I had just introduced them to a world where actions are measured in routing numbers, audit trails, and federal indictments. Connor tried to form the sentence, but his mouth only opened and closed in a silent, desperate reflex. The polished entrepreneur was gone. The intimidating bully was gone. All that remained was a scared man staring at a single sheet of paper that signaled the end of his life as he knew it. Patricia's breathing grew louder, harsh, ragged intakes of air that sounded painfully dry. She looked at me not as her child, but as an executioner. The air in the conference room turned to ice. The steady hum of the air conditioning unit felt deafening now, an unfeeling soundtrack to their imminent destruction. The realization settled over them, a suffocating, inescapable blanket of truth. They had walked into the title office believing they were manipulating an insecure younger sister who would bend to their demands. They thought they could use childhood guilt to secure a quiet payout. Instead, they had walked blindly into an airtight trap. They were no longer dealing with a daughter they could bully, dismiss, or threaten. They were dealing with a federal investigation they could not outrun, initiated by the very person they had spent a lifetime treating as invisible. The confirmation receipt sat on the polished mahogany. It was a single sheet of standard printer paper bearing a string of alphanumeric characters, yet it carried the density of a collapsing star. The silence that gripped the conference room held for 10 agonizing seconds. It was a brittle, fragile quiet stretched to the point of breaking. Connor broke it. He did not speak. His physical reaction arrived first. He pushed his body backward, driving his legs against the floor. The legs of his heavy leather executive chair dragged across the carpet, producing a harsh, undignified squeal. The sound was abrasive, a jarring friction that mirrored the sudden, catastrophic tearing of his manufactured reality. He wanted to flee. The instinct to escape the consequences of his actions overwhelmed whatever remaining shred of composure he possessed. He scrambled to his feet, knocking his knees against the underside of the table. He looked at the closed oak door, then back at the printed receipt, realizing that stepping out of this room would not remove him from the jurisdiction of federal investigators. There was no referee to complain to, no coach to manipulate. When we were children, Connor once broke a neighbor's basement window with a rogue slapshot. Instead of owning the mistake, he pointed at a younger teammate and swore the kid had borrowed his stick. He had spent his entire life outsourcing his guilt. Now, cornered by a paper trail he could not gaslight into submission, he reflexively sought a human shield. He turned on our parents. "You told me this was handled," Connor spat. He directed his venom not at me but at the two people who had just pledged their home to save him. The veins in his neck stood out thick and corded. "You said you had her under control. You promised me she would sign the paperwork and clear the escrow account by noon." Richard flinched as if he had been struck across the jaw. He looked up at his favored son, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound betrayal. The patriarch, who had spent 3 decades bending reality to accommodate this boy, was now standing in the wreckage of that accommodation. "Connor, son, we tried," Richard stammered, raising his hands in a futile gesture of placation. "We brought her here. We laid out the trust. We did exactly what the lawyer told us to do." "You did nothing!" Connor shouted, his voice cracking. He paced the narrow strip of carpet between the table and the glass wall. "You brought me into a trap. You brought me here to get slaughtered. If I go down for this, I am telling them everything. I will tell the investigators you signed the collateral agreements knowing exactly where the money was going. I am not taking the fall for this alone." The illusion of family loyalty evaporated in an instant. The mantra they had weaponized against me for 28 years shattered upon contact with actual adversity. They did not protect each other. They merely guarded their shared delusion. And the moment that delusion proved insufficient, they turned into predators, fighting over the remaining scraps of a ruined carcass. Richard seemed to physically collapse under the weight of his son's threat. The air rushed out of him. He sank back into his chair, his shoulders rounding his chest, caving inward. He looked like a deflated balloon resting on the leather upholstery. He had sacrificed his daughter, his integrity, and his primary residence to elevate his son. And his reward was a promise of mutual destruction. He buried his face in his hands, unable to look at the paperwork, unable to look at me, and entirely unable to face the son he had created. Patricia did not collapse. She pivoted. She possessed a survival instinct rooted in pure, unadulterated manipulation. When intimidation failed, she defaulted to martyrdom. She pushed herself up from the table. Her knees trembled. The arrogant, affluent persona she had worn into the building washed away, leaving a desperate hollow shell. She rounded the edge of the mahogany table and took a step toward me. I remained standing behind my chair, ensuring a solid physical barrier remained between us. "Isla, please." Patricia wept. The tears spilled over her eyelashes, ruining her carefully applied makeup, leaving dark, jagged streaks down her cheeks. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot send your brother to prison. We will lose the house. We will lose everything." She reached a hand out, her fingers grasping at the empty air inches from my tailored blazer. "I know we made mistakes," she sobbed, her breath hitching in a rhythmic, practiced cadence. "I know we were not always there for you, but we can fix it. I promise you we can fix it. We will withdraw the trust. We will figure out another way to pay the bank. Just call the authorities and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you made a mistake on the report." I watched her unravel. I remembered my high school graduation. I had earned the highest grade point average in my class and secured a full academic scholarship to a state university. Patricia had promised to host a celebratory dinner. I sat in my graduation gown in our living room for 3 hours waiting. She never showed up. She had driven Connor to a hockey equipment expo 2 towns over and claimed she lost track of the time. The emptiness of her promises was a documented historical fact. "You can withdraw a report," Patricia pleaded, misinterpreting my silence as hesitation. "We can leave right now and go celebrate you. We can go to any restaurant you want. We can have a real birthday party just for you, Isla. We will buy a beautiful cake. We will make you the center of attention. I promise. Just pick up the phone and cancel the investigation." She was bartering with illusions. She was offering me a fabricated birthday party in exchange for federal perjury. She genuinely believed that the prospect of her attention was a currency valuable enough to purchase my freedom and my professional license. "You cannot cancel a federal fraud report, Patricia," I stated. My voice was a flat clinical instrument. "The data has been transmitted. The routing numbers are in their possession. The investigation is already active." I reached down and fastened the brass clasps on my leather briefcase. The sharp clicks cut through the sound of her weeping. I smoothed the lapels of my blazer, adjusting my cuffs with precise, methodical movements. I did not feel a sense of triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt the crisp, clean sensation of a ledger finally balancing itself to zero. "You are destroying this family," Patricia wailed, her voice echoing off the acoustic panels. She clutched her hands to her chest, playing the role of the victim one final time. "You are tearing us apart because you are too stubborn to forgive." I picked up my briefcase. I looked at the 3 of them. I looked at Connor pacing frantically near the glass wall. I looked at Richard hiding his face in his hands. I looked at my mother weeping over a trap of her own design. "I am not destroying this family," I said. The acoustics of the room carried my final verdict with absolute clarity. "I am simply refusing to balance your toxic ledger anymore. The debt belongs to you. You are going to have to pay it." I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy oak door. I did not rush. My stride was even and measured. I gripped the brass handle, turned the latch, and stepped out into the carpeted hallway of the title office. I left the door open just wide enough to hear the immediate chaotic aftermath of my departure. Connor began screaming at Richard again, his voice cracking under the strain of impending incarceration. Patricia wailed a high, piercing sound of absolute despair, mourning the loss of her home and her social standing. They were trapped in that soundproof room with the voided trust document, the commercial loan agreements, and the printed confirmation receipt. They were locked in a cage constructed entirely of their own choices. I walked down the corridor toward the reception area. The staff at the front desk kept their eyes averted, maintaining a polite professional distance from the localized implosion occurring in Conference Room B. I bypassed the elevators and walked toward the primary exit. The building entrance featured a set of heavy, thick glass doors that separated the climate-controlled lobby from the crisp Colorado morning. I pushed my weight against the metal bar. The door swung open, allowing a rush of cold mountain air to wash over my face. I stepped over the threshold and onto the concrete pavement. The heavy glass door of the office building swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of my mother's wailing. The federal justice system operates at its own methodical pace. It does not rush, and it does not negotiate. 6 weeks after the conference room door closed, the state banking authority concluded their preliminary inquiry and handed the file over to the federal prosecutor. The paper trail I provided was airtight. Connor faced a grand jury in late November. The indictment came down 3 days later. The charges included wire fraud, bank fraud, and the use of interstate communications to facilitate a criminal enterprise. He tried to offer a plea deal attempting to shift the blame to his various business partners, but the shell company registered in Delaware had only one name on the incorporation documents. His name stood alone on every fraudulent transfer. He is currently awaiting sentencing. The federal guidelines for his specific bracket indicate a mandatory minimum in a federal penitentiary. The arrogant tycoon persona did not survive the arraignment. His friends, the people he sought to impress with private charter flights and expensive watches, stopped returning his calls the moment his bank accounts were frozen. Richard and Patricia met the exact fate they had engineered. The commercial lender initiated foreclosure proceedings the moment the fraud division verified the stolen equity. The bank seized the property on Elmwood Drive, stripping them of the physical foundation they had leveraged to ruin. My parents were forced to vacate the home in early January. They downsized into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The thin walls and stained carpets provided a stark contrast to the sprawling colonial they had used to project their status. Their social standing, built entirely on the illusion of affluence, evaporated overnight. The charity galas and country club luncheons faded away. When their former friends asked what happened, Patricia spun a predictable fiction. She told anyone who would listen that her daughter had abandoned them in their hour of need. She claimed I turned my back on family when things became difficult. I felt no urge to correct her narrative. The truth requires no defense. Let her keep her fiction. It is the only asset she has left. My ledger is clear, and my focus remains on the life I chose to build. The winter arrived in Colorado with heavy, deliberate snowfall. I watched the seasons change from the window of my corner office, managing portfolios and securing futures for clients who understood the value of honest accounting. My business grew steadily. The firm promoted me to senior partner shortly after the new year. I earned the title not through manipulation, but through the quiet, relentless application of skill. I continued to review contracts, build corporate firewalls, and protect assets, applying the same ruthless precision that had saved my own life. My personal life reflected the same structural integrity. Liam and I purchased a cabin at 9,000 feet elevation, tucked into a dense grove of lodgepole pines near a mountain pass. The air up there is thin and crisp, carrying the sharp scent of wood smoke and frozen earth. Building a life in the high country requires a specific type of discipline. You learn quickly that survival is not just about layering up against the cold. True self-reliance involves knowing exactly who you allow into your shelter. You do not invite people who start fires on the wooden floor and blame the wind. You invite people who carry their own firewood. On a Friday evening in late January, the temperature dropped into the single digits. The snow piled high against the cabin windows, insulating us from the world outside. Inside, the cast iron stove radiated a steady, comfortable heat. We hosted a small dinner. The guest list consisted of 6 people. Evelyn Vance drove up from the city, trading her tailored suits for a thick wool sweater. 2 of Liam's fellow backcountry rescue guides brought fresh bread and a hearty winter stew. There were no expensive suits, no reserve wines ordered to impress strangers, and no hidden agendas lurking beneath the conversation. We sat around a reclaimed oak table. The laughter was genuine, echoing off the exposed timber beams. Nobody performed for an audience. Nobody demanded loyalty as a prerequisite for basic respect. When one of the guides accidentally knocked over his water glass, he grabbed a towel and wiped it up. Nobody blamed the person sitting next to him. Nobody demanded an apology. The mistake was acknowledged, corrected, and forgotten. It was a mundane interaction, yet it felt like a quiet revelation. This was the family I had chosen, built on a foundation of mutual accountability and steady, unforced connection. As the dinner plates were cleared, Liam stood up and walked into the kitchen. The low hum of the refrigerator blended with the crackle of the wood stove. He returned a few minutes later holding a round ceramic plate. Resting in the center was a birthday cake. It was not a cheap grocery store pastry sweating inside a cardboard box on a concrete porch. It was not a toxic chocolate ganache designed to trigger a medical emergency. It was a genuine vanilla bean cake baked from scratch, layered with fresh cream and dusted with powdered sugar. Vanilla is my actual favorite flavor. Liam remembered. He did not need a calendar alert or a guilt trip to recall a simple detail about the person he loved. He paid attention because he cared. He set the plate in front of me. A single small candle flickered on top, casting a warm glow across the oak table. The friends surrounding me smiled, singing a quiet, out-of-tune rendition of the traditional song. I did not feel the hollow ache of my 18th birthday. I did not feel the suffocating pressure of the steakhouse ambush. I felt anchored. I blew out the candle. The thin wisp of smoke drifted upward, disappearing into the warm cabin air. Liam cut a slice and handed it to me. I took a bite. The taste of genuine vanilla was rich and sweet, grounding me in the present moment. The texture was light, the frosting perfectly balanced. I ate my cake at 9,000 feet elevation, surrounded by the family I had built from scratch. My parents were living in a cramped apartment, trapped in a prison of their own design, telling stories to empty rooms. My brother was facing the sterile, unyielding reality of the federal justice system, learning that some ledgers cannot be erased. They had tried to drag me down into their ruin, expecting me to sacrifice my hard-earned altitude to cushion their fall. I refused. I closed the door, locked the safe, and let them face the gravity of their choices. I looked around the table at the faces of people who showed up when it mattered. My ledger was perfectly balanced. Every debt was settled. Every liability was removed. The ghosts of my past were permanently evicted from my shelter. I am Isla Murphy. I am 28 years old. I protect assets for a living. And the most valuable asset I ever secured was my own freedom. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to close the door on the people who were supposed to protect you, just to save yourself, leave a comment below. Share the moment you finally balanced your own ledger. Thank you for listening to Fluffy Revenge. Subscribe to the channel and I will see you in the next one.
Parenting is perhaps the most terrifying leap of faith a human being can take. From the moment you hold a child in your arms, an ancient, overwhelming instinct takes root: the desire to protect. We want to shield them from the harshness of the world, to pave their roads, and to ensure they never feel the sting of failure. But as we navigate the complexities of raising children in modern American culture, a society that simultaneously champions rugged self-reliance and an intense pressure for material success, that protective instinct can sometimes curdle into something deeply dangerous. The story of Isla Murphy and her family is not just a gripping thriller about financial fraud and severed ties. Beneath the surface, it is a profound cautionary tale about the dark side of parenting. It holds up a mirror to the values we instill in our families and forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth: love without wisdom is not a safety net. It is a snare. At the heart of the Murphy family's collapse is a tragedy born from blind affection. In their desperate bid to elevate their favored son Connor, his parents shielded him from every consequence of his actions. Whenever he stumbled, they rushed in to sweep the debris under the rug, prioritizing his comfort over his character. In American culture, where we often equate good parenting with providing our children everything we never had, it is incredibly easy to cross the line from supporting to enabling. But by constantly cleaning up Connor's messes, his parents robbed him of the most vital tool a human being can possess: resilience. A tree that is permanently tied to stakes will never grow the deep roots required to withstand a storm. By denying Connor the opportunity to fail, to feel the weight of his own mistakes, and to take responsibility, they inadvertently engineered his weakness. He grew into an entitled adult who only knew how to lean on others, ultimately resorting to deceit and fraud to survive. The lesson here is sharp and unrelenting for any parent. True love requires the courage to let your children fall. Teaching them to face adversity with honesty and integrity is far more compassionate than using your own power or wallet to erase their errors. This brings us to the second fatal flaw in the Murphy household: the intoxicating illusion of material success. There is a pervasive pressure in American suburban society to maintain a flawless facade. We are often tempted to chase the manicured lawns, the prestigious zip codes, and the picture-perfect celebrations that signal we have made it. But when the preservation of that image becomes more important than the moral foundation of the family, the core begins to rot. Isla's parents became so obsessed with their social standing and the illusion of Connor's success that they willingly sacrificed their own ethics. They engaged in fraud, set up shell companies, and were prepared to offer their own daughter as a human sacrifice to the federal justice system, all to keep up appearances. Their downfall reminds us that any legacy built on deception is merely a house of cards waiting for a breeze. As parents, our ultimate responsibility is to model integrity. A quiet, honest life, lived with genuine connection, offers infinitely more peace than a gilded cage built on lies. We must teach our children that true worth is not measured by the car in the driveway or the label on the clothes, but by the character they display when no one is watching. Perhaps the most striking lesson from Isla's journey is her redefinition of family loyalty. In many traditional family structures, there is a deeply ingrained belief that family comes first, an unspoken rule that blood obligations require us to endure endless toxicity. Isla challenges this dangerous misconception with breathtaking clarity and emotional awareness. Her response to her family's betrayal was not rooted in blind rage or noisy vengeance. Instead, she applied wisdom and absolute boundaries. She recognized that enabling her family's crimes was not an act of love. It was an act of complicity. By refusing to sign their fraudulent trust and holding them accountable to the law, Isla exercised the highest form of compassion: tough love. She cut off the oxygen to their dysfunction. Parents must instill this same discernment in their children. We must teach them that a healthy family is a sanctuary of mutual respect, not a shield for criminal behavior or emotional abuse. We must empower them to know when to walk away, understanding that sometimes letting someone face the law or the harsh reality of society is the only way to save their soul from an endless downward spiral. Ultimately, the tragedy of the Murphy family stems from the parents' failure to look inward. They spent decades projecting their ambitions onto their children, constantly looking outward for validation, borrowed money, and unearned prestige. Isla conversely embodies the rugged, self-reliant spirit of her Colorado environment. She built her life from nothing, brick by brick, relying on her own grit, ethical clarity, and emotional maturity. Before we can mold our children, we must first mold ourselves. Parenting is a relentless mirror, reflecting our own hidden biases, our selfishness, and our unresolved traumas. If we wish to raise children equipped with wisdom, morality, and resilience, the three core pillars of a meaningful life, we must cultivate those very traits within our own hearts. A parent grounded in emotional awareness and ethical strength naturally radiates a peace that becomes the true foundation of a home. We are not just passing down inheritances of money or property. We are passing down the emotional architecture our children will use to build their own lives. As you reflect on Isla's story and the shattered remains of the family she left behind, I invite you to turn the lens on your own life. What boundaries do you struggle to enforce? Where does your desire to protect cross the line into dangerous enabling? If stories like this resonate with you, if you value quiet strength, the triumph of boundaries, and the raw, unfiltered truth of human relationships, I encourage you to subscribe and follow the channel Fluffy Revenge. We explore the profound, often hidden dynamics of family and the courage it takes to rewrite your own narrative. In the end, the most difficult boundary a parent must draw is often with their own heart. How much are we willing to let our children struggle so they can learn to stand? When does our protective embrace turn into a cage? The answer is rarely simple, and the line is always shifting. Perhaps as you look at your own family tonight, you will be left to wonder, are you building a foundation strong enough to hold the truth, or are you just desperately trying to keep the paint from peeling?